lose weight to become normal weight, when you compare them to normal weight people who were never obese with the same similar lean body mass, the formerly obese people have a lower total daily energy expenditure, and they have higher markers of hunger. They have higher appetite. So it's working on both sides of that equation to push you back. So the devil's advocate argument is, well, I ate this amount of calories that should have been a calorie deficit and I didn't lose weight. Or it's all calories are created equal. I'll tell people all calories are created equal, because saying a calorie is not a calorie is like saying second hands on the clock are different. No, they're just a unit of measurement. All sources of calories are not equal. So let's take budgeting, right? I used that earlier. Sports car, okay? So let's say somebody makes $1 million a year, right? If they want to spend let's assume no loans, just for sake of ease. If they want to spend $150,000 on a sports car, but they're still able to pay their mortgage, they can take care of their responsibilities, and they can put money away for retirement, can they buy that sports car? Sure they can, right? And is it a bad investment? I guess you could argue it's a bad investment because they could put that $150,000 in those investments, but maybe that sports car makes them feel good and gives them a little carrot on the end of the stick to, keep working and whatnot. But if I take somebody who makes $200,000 a year, should they buy the $150,000 sports car if it means they can't pay their mortgage, they can't, save for retirement? No, of course not, right? Similar thing with energy, right? So if I'm, somebody who's very active and I burn a lot of calories, is it a big deal if I have a Pop-Tart, say, if I'm still getting enough protein, I'm hitting my target energy, I'm getting enough fiber in my micronutrients? If that gives me that little carrot on the end of the stick to keep being consistent, not a big deal. But if we're talking about a smaller woman with less lean mass who needs to eat 1,200 calories a day to lose weight, that's not a very good investment, right? It's not a very good use of funds. So what I'll tell people is, people will say, well, how do I know what a deficit is? How do I know how many calories to eat, right?
Because also, just on that point, I heard you talk about food labeling as well and how inaccurate that can
be.
be.
So you can have up to a 20% error in food labeling, right? So some people will so what that means is it could say 100 calories, it could be 80, it could be 120. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say if it's coming from a big food company and they have pretty rigorous standards, it's probably not that far off. But they're allowed up to that, right? Because they recognize that some food sources are very heterogeneous. It'd be difficult to get it exactly on. So you'll have some people say, well, see, calorie counting is useless because you can't know exactly how many calories you're taking in. And are you going to get your BMR measured? Are you going to get your NEAT measured? Are you going to get this measured? It can be much more simple than that. Again, financial analogy. I could make the argument that keeping a budget is useless because you never know what inflation is exactly doing. And if you have investments, you can get differential, returns on it. And on the output side, you have unexpected expenses. You have fluctuations in expenses. Your power bill is going to be different from month to month, right? Your car breaks down one month. But if you look at the average over time, you can get a pretty good idea of, on average, what your expenses are like, right? And you can get a pretty good idea over time, unlike entrepreneurs like us, but even like us, you can start to kind of see the trends and get a relatively good idea of what it's going to be. So when it comes to calories in and calories out, yes, tracking exactly can be very, very difficult. But if you are monitoring your body weight and you're being consistent with how you track, you'll know if you're in a calorie deficit. And I think another thing that's crosses people up, this actually showed up on that review of the successful weight loss maintainers. They actually talked about one of the things that was a barrier for them or hard for them was the weight fluctuations. Because if you've ever weighed in every day, have you ever done this where you've weighed every day? Yeah. Even first thing in the morning, right?
Up, down.
Bounces all over the place, right? Yeah. So actually with our coaching and then with our app, we're not just looking at one weight. We encourage people to weigh, as long as it doesn't cause them a lot of stress and anxiety. weigh in daily. And then it's taking the average of those, because day to day changes in weight are much more dictated by fluctuations in fluid, but week to week and month to month averages reflect loss or gain of mass. So for example, if you're monitoring your body weight, taking averages and looking at that over time, you'll know if you're in a calorie deficit, because on average, you're seeing it go down, right? Now, I wanted to make one more point, which is you don't have to track calories to lose weight. Absolutely not. It's just one methodology, because no matter what you do, you have to have some form of restraint, right? And my friend Peter Attia actually breaks it down nicely into a couple different 3 buckets, right? You can have dietary restraint, which is low carb, plant-based, whole food, whatever it is. You're restricting some sort of food group or type of food, right? Then you have a time restriction. You eat within a certain time frame, a certain window. Then you can have just straight up calorie restriction, where you're tracking and monitoring. What you choose to do, I think a lot in terms of what is best for an individual, boils down to their psychology and what feels easy. So this is where a lot of the diet wars start, because somebody will do, say, low carb, right? And they'll get results from that. And they'll say, man, it felt like I wasn't even dieting. And for whatever reason, that clicked with the algorithm in their brain and felt easy. And they got progress from that. But then they assume that everyone else will have the same response. Somebody else does low fat. Somebody else does intermittent fasting, whatever have you. And you have all these stories. Me personally, I'm the kind of person that if I tried to restrict certain foods, I end up getting that binge response, right? But if you tell me I can eat whatever I want, as long as I'm tracking it, I become ridiculously consistent. And I mean, I'm still eating mostly like whole food, minimally processed foods, those sorts of things, because they're better for satiety. But I don't stress out about having some snacks here and there that are, bad.
Consistency.
Because I'm being very consistent, right?
How important is that consistency?
It is the most important thing. So there is actually a meta-analysis. And when I say meta-analysis, think a study of studies, okay? So it's not a new study. It's what they're trying to do in a meta-analysis is they are trying to take studies that are similar and compile them together to see, is there a consensus here? Is there an overall effect here, right? So there was a meta-analysis of where they looked at 14 different popular diets, and these ranged from low carb to high carb, low fat, right? And what they found is on the long term, none of them were better than the others for weight loss. But when they stratified them for adherence, from least adherent to most adherent.
What does that mean?
So people who were consistent, basically. So when they stratified them for, I think, compliance, another way to put it, when they stratified them that way, regardless of diet, a linear effect of adherence on weight loss. So what that tells me is actually the best diet for the individual is the one that can consistently execute. They all function the same way, which is, creating some sort of calorie deficit. Now, some people will say, that's not true. I did a low carb diet and I was eating more food. You probably felt more satiated because you were eating less calorie dense food. You probably were eating a greater quantity in terms of weight of food, but you were eating less calories.
Is there